Thank you. I want to turn us to the more, to the other side of the panel and just get briefly your story, Martha. I know you're very passionate about gender equality and the nexus between SDG 7 and achieving energy. Just please tell us, as a young female engineer in this country, where does your story begin and where did you get your interest to engage in the energy sector? Just briefly tell us.
Thanks, Passy, for having me and for having me on this panel. This is really exciting for me because as a scientist, I don't get a lot of time to tell stories as part of my day job, so this is pretty cool. I guess I'll start from where Magiro stopped, which is he was trying to address a problem that exists today. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like us to just take a few minutes and transport ourselves into the future. So assume that the year is 2080, assume there's 3 billion Africans on the continent, but assume that all those Africans can afford and can access extremely cheap electricity. So if you think about it like that, what that suggests is that the electricity will be so cheap we can mechanize all our agriculture. The electricity will be so cheap we can digitize all our education. The electricity will be so cheap we can electrify all our transportation and actually connect African countries to each other. And the electricity will be so cheap that the social media that we use today to understand each other across this continent and across the globe will almost be free. If you think about it like that, then it starts becoming rather obvious that energy access and electrification is actually a social justice issue. If you want to think about Africa today, or Kenya specifically, because it's where we are at the moment, the opportunities that are accessible to people purely because of where they're born, rural area or a city, Nairobi or Cape Town or Lagos, then you start seeing rather clearly that inequality and inequity is heightened when you have serious infrastructure deficits in rural areas and areas that are far from the grid, as Magiro was discussing. So if we think about it like that, why do I do what I do, I guess? And why am I here today trying to explain why green energy is important for Africa? One, because I think on a very fundamental level, Africans deserve to live a life of dignity and comfort because we are people, just really basically, because we are people, we deserve a good life. But more specifically, because of where we are at now and what we understand to be our reality today, is the idea that we really, really need to rely not just on external help, but on ourselves to make that vision that I've just painted a reality. So a lot of my work revolves around trying to make that future that I've just described a reality. A lot of my work as an engineer, a lot of my work as a project manager. But as another thing that I do as well is to try and design a world where I would like to live in as a woman in this continent. And so I do tell stories about other female engineers as well, who are trying to contribute to this vision of a future that we are trying to create here. And their stories are shared on a publication that's freely available online called Quengineers. Why I think that's important is because I think we need to harmonize the idea of who Africans present themselves as and who we know ourselves to be. I think it's really important for us to see ourselves in a future that is comfortable and dignified and that is created by us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martha. I think it's very powerful what you said, that Africans deserve to live a life of dignity, and having access to quality, reliable, and safe electricity, power, energy sources is one of those ways of achieving that dignity that we need as Africans. Dare I turn to you, Halima, as a legal practitioner, and now focusing specifically on energy and climate, especially litigation processes, because I do know you have participated in some of these, court cases that really look at unsustainable energy forms. For me, I'm really interested in getting from you, where does your story begin? Where did the interest come from as a legal practitioner? Why energy and why climate issues?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy and excited to be on this panel and to tell stories, which is something that I also do not do as part of my work. Specifically creative stories, interpreting law and policy. So my climate story started in 2014. I was working as a pupil in Parliament, and we had 3 bills that came before the Senate as well as the National Assembly. We had the mining bill, which was undergoing comments. It was at the committee stage, and we had different stakeholders coming in to give their comments. We also had the local content bill about, of course, the value chain in which project developers are meant to beneficiate local people. And we also had the natural resources and benefit sharing bill. So there's a theme that runs across these 3 bills. It's about people and how they benefit from the laws that should serve them. So I decided to do a master's in energy and natural resources law. I was very excited about it. And when I came back, I worked with an environmental justice outfit. And what it did was empower local communities to participate in projects, including energy projects, and governance decisions that impact their lives and livelihoods. Communities can only participate, meaningfully participate, if they know what it is they should participate in. So I'm very passionate and excited about legal empowerment, which is what I do now, whether as a member of the Law Society of Kenya, giving comments to bills and policies before Parliament, whether putting government to account in terms of energy or environmental licenses that have been granted to project developers, and ensuring that due process and integrity, and there has been integrity of the entire either environmental process or indeed energy application process that has been undertaken. So through, of course, public interest litigation, and whether also empowering, educating, providing legal aid to local communities, helping them understand that they are key stakeholders to these laws and policies right at inception, but also at implementation, ensuring that they're empowered to send access to information letters, to request government to give them feedback on how these laws and policies affect them.
Oh, wow, incredible. And that's an aspect that we always leave out when we're having these conversations in the energy spaces. Knowing your rights as a citizen, knowing that you have the right to access to quality, affordable, reliable energy, and being able to be empowered, even with the legal instruments, to be able to take action and hold those responsible for this accountable. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Halima. I want to take us back a little bit. Having listened to all the stories that have been shared so far, there might be someone in the audience saying, green energy, what exactly is green energy? And I just want to give all of us an opportunity to just, in 1 minute, what does the term green energy mean? Just unpack that for us. And I'll start with you, Martha. What is green energy?
Okay. So in its simplest form, I suppose, green energy is energy that is obtained from sources that are renewable. Those sources include water, like Magiro Hydro. They include geothermal, which is heat that shoots out of our soil in the Rift Valley. They include things like the sun, solar irradiation. We live in the tropics, so we have quite a bit of sunshine here. They include things like wind. So if we can convert some of these natural resources that are readily available here to us and use those to turn machines that he was talking about called turbines and use that to generate electricity, then we say we are generating green electricity because those sources are freely available from nature and they're always renewable, which is different from what would be called fossil fuel-based generation.
Thank you, Martha. I think you've placed it very, very simply. I want to come to you, Halima. Just in 1 minute, if you were to explain to a 13-year-old who has never encountered energy before, and you wanted to explain to them what green energy is, what would you say?
Okay, so when you think of green, what do you think of? The environment, trees, green, isn't it? So green energy comes from what Martha has said, replenishable sources of energy. An energy source that is not exactly finite, it is replenishable in the fact that once you use it, it's replenished quickly on a human timescale.
Thank you so much, Halima. I want to turn to you, John, because you're mainly focusing on hydro as the green source. And maybe just to throw out some of the terminologies we tend to use in the sector, you'll hear green energy, you will hear renewable energy, you will hear sustainable energy, and these terminologies are used interchangeably. But from your perspective, John, in just simple words, 1 minute or so, what does green energy mean to you?
Normally focus green energy, meaning as some of like water and the solar, because that they are not mainly created by a man, it is there.
So now I want to take us to the theme of our panel today. We have shared our stories, where we started from. We have defined what green energy means to us in simple terms. But now I want to bring us back to the theme. Why is green energy a big deal for the African tribe?
I think first we have to consider the population today and the population in future. I think energy, green or otherwise, will be particularly important for the African continent because it is one of the enablers or vehicles or tools that we will need for job creation and economic prosperity. So that's one. We are a continent of 1 billion people and growing every year. It's 1 billion very young people. In fact, I'm on the wrong side of the youth bracket. Many Africans are in their teens and in their 20s. Those Africans need massive opportunities. They need a place to apply their skills. They need a way to earn an income. And one of the ways to enable them to do so is to provide them with energy that allows them to do manufacturing, agro-processing, transportation, that kind of thing. So fundamentally, I think it's really important for us to provide the energy that is required for Africa to be a high economic engine for all the citizens of this continent. The second reason, I touched on it briefly also at the beginning, is an issue of equity. I would really like a future where more women and girls don't have their value measured by how much manual and paid labor we can be doing. There's appliances that do 90% of the household work that we spend quite a bit of our time and effort doing today on this continent, whether in rural or urban areas. If we have energy that is affordable and accessible, what that means is we free up the time of women and girls to live up to their highest ideal, to assert themselves and to apply themselves to doing the things that they actually want to be doing with their time and possibly enjoy to be doing with their time, you know? So I'm really interested in a future where women get to choose how they spend their time and effort because the choice is available. We don't seem to have that today. And then I think finally is an issue of competitiveness. As I said, we're about to be a 3 billion people continent. And the thing is, we are a massive market. If you think about 3 billion people each giving you $1, we are the hotbed of marketing at this point. But what we also need to be is a massive producer. Because we can't simply just be accepting things from other people when we have the capacity to create things here as well. So Africa has always been a continent that creates things. It's just that we create things for global consumption and hardly any for our own internal consumption. So it would be interesting and fascinating for me to see what the green energy revolution would do in allowing us to be competitive, to be a mass producer of goods and services that can be used, yes, internally by the 3 billion people African market, but externally as well. I think there's quite a few things that Africa can offer the world that we are yet to do so because we don't have access to the energy that we need to do so.
Very powerful. Africans for Africans, not just being receivers, but also being the innovators in the space and creating that future that we want for ourselves. Martha, I come to you. Why is green energy a big deal? I know you touched a little bit about it when you were sharing with us your story and how you got into the space. But from a legal perspective, why green energy? Why is it a deal? Why should Kenyans, Africans give priority to green energy solutions, forms, sources, and really advocate for those sources of energy?
Commitment to ensure that whichever resources we have been given, left for by our grandfathers, is there for our grandchildren. So the fundamental, at our core, we need to ensure that whichever resources that we have are the same resources, or at least leave them in a state that our grandchildren can use them. And green energy allows that. It allows us to develop and live an environment that is still livable, sustainable for our grandchildren. And the second reason is Africa, even though it has contributed the least amount of greenhouse gas emissions, so about 2 to 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, we are the most impacted by climate change. So we have a responsibility to ensure that we do not shoot ourselves in the foot. We have to transition to green energy, to renewable energy for our own survival. The third reason is we already have these resources. We are rich in solar. We have massive amounts of hydro, wind, even tidal energy, ocean energy. Why would we want to use resources that are expensive, that have a carbon price, that are expensive environmentally when we have to decommission? Why don't we use resources that are naturally available to us, that are now cost competitive compared to non-renewable resources, and ensure that we kill two birds with one stone? Cheap, affordable, taking care of our future.
Oliva, I think you bring in a very interesting point, and that is legacy. What are we doing now to secure a sustainable energy future for the generations to come? So it's a twofold, and I love that, legacy, and that's why green energy is important. So thank you so much for that. I have a follow-up question for you, but I want to turn to you, John, to just tell us, for you, why green energy? Why didn't you invest in a different source of energy to power your village, your home? Why did it have to be hydro?
I think on my side, I can rock as the green energy in one way. Mainly, if you get affordable and reliable power, that is a time that you shall not end up on using green energy. Because the non-green energy, it is so costly. And that if you look on what is there, we normally have the sun that is there at the time. And also we have the water is there. So if you normally focus on the water, on the hydro, you should not have a lot of cost than mainly looking for the non-reliable, because the production have become very high for the factories, because the energy that you are using there, mainly it is not reliable and affordable.
I think you did mention there that reliability and affordability and accessibility is what makes green energy a big deal for Africans, and that's why you chose that. I want to turn to Chiagozie. I'm really crossing my fingers we get to hear you at this point. And I'll just circulate back to the first question to you. How did you get to the energy space? What is your story?
I'm really happy to be here and happy to hear the fellow panelists who've raised really crucial issues. I'm really excited to hear all this conversation. For me, I lived in Nigeria for for a huge chunk of my life. And during my undergraduate days, I did work as a student broadcaster, on the radio, and I was quite engaged internationally in a bunch of things, and I didn't really have sufficient electricity for to be able to meet, the my workload as my colleagues from the global north would be meeting theirs. So I had to spend a lot of time probably sleeping over in the radio studio or finding a hotel to lodge in, or I had to stay outside my house a lot of time to be able to meet my basic, study needs and engagement needs, something that my colleagues from all parts of the world were able to do from the comfort of their home. So this was a very, a serious issue for me because it reduces my productivity, gives me a lot of discomfort, and stresses me a lot, and in this situation, you're not very optimal in your delivery. And then I started engaging, of course, in the international space. And one thing that particularly struck me was when I normally go to Germany for different, conferences or different events, and I find the model that they're using for their energy, some kind of community energy systems that they're using to utilize solar and give citizens a lot of independence, something we describe as energy democracy, and they're able to produce electricity, they're able to sell to the government, they're able to use as much as they want and as when they want and how they want. And it was really inspirational for me. It was a good startup for me to really drive the energy conversation. And I think looking back now, it's been an incredible journey of driving this conversation and trying to create spaces where young people engage in energy conversation at a global level.
Thank you, Chair Gozier. I think now that we have you and we haven't really had much of your voice, I want to throw in a question that should have come to you earlier. I know that you have been participating at the global level in the high-level dialogues on energy. And my question to you is, what are the conversations taking place in that global platform, and why should Africans and the African tribe pay attention to what's happening at that level?
Of course, as we know, the conversation is about renewable energy, sustainable energy, clean cooking, trying to move our energy system into a very sustainable one, both at the developing country level and also in the developed country. So this conversation is happening. It's about improving technology. It's about financing, especially for countries in the global south, African countries as well, that are not able to finance this at a very large scale. It requires a lot of funding, a lot of capacity building, a lot of upskilling for people to be able to deeply engage here. So there's a lot of conversation also about bridging the gender gap in all of this. But it's very important that Africa is deeply engaged in this conversation. Like I think it was Halima that was mentioning, this is critically important because Africa has incredible resources at their disposal. We have the sun, we have all the other natural means of energy, we have the wind in sufficient fold. So there's really no excuse for us not to be able to tap into this resource. When I go to Abuja in Nigeria, I have average temperature of 35 degrees C, and the country has, I have also been to Kenya a couple of times. So these countries in Africa have about the highest solar radiation in across the world, maybe behind countries in the Middle East, and it's a no-brainer that Africa should be in this conversation and should be leading it actually, because we have a natural resource directly coming to us. Here in Geneva, where I am, we of course we see the sun a few times, but it's not as consistent as we see like in Africa. Yet we use solar in a bunch of places here. So imagine with the limitation we have with the weather, if we had enough of the sun, you can imagine how much solar will be dominating here. So I think Africa needs to lead that conversation because we have everything in place to drive it, and we can create this market for ourselves. We should not allow people to create markets for us and transfer technology to us. We can actually take a lead in this, and it helps us, get into a green future, reduced emission, no damages done, new jobs created, a lot of healthy living. So it's really important for us, and it could be very key in driving an industrialization that could happen in the continent.
Thank you, Chair for sharing that with us. And Chair, you raised something that I want to bring to the panel on the ground, and it's the issue of resources. Africa has been highlighted to have a great renewable energy potential just from the accessibility of the natural resources that we have, the sun, the wind, the water. Geothermal energy is also now identified as renewable energy. But there's a different twist and some narratives that we hear that we need to develop in the same way that other continents developed as well. And as we know, a lot of the developed continents developed under the use of fossil fuels in their various forms. So given that we in Africa also have resources in the form of oil, gas, name it, is it enough to develop and reach our development potential as Africa using only green energy? There is a debate that we need to have. What would you say to the people who push the narrative that it's Africa's time to also utilize oil, utilize gas for Africa's development? I want to come to you, Martha, to just share with us your perspective about this debate that happens more often than not. And I know you have had this narrative in various platforms. What's your take?
So I'll go in and wear my engineer hat and be the controversial person on this panel. The answer to that is that honestly, it depends on the scale that we are thinking about. So today, if we're thinking about Africa in 2050, not 2080, as I initially said so earlier, then the truth is we cannot have an entire stop of what is happening today and transition immediately into generating electricity through solar and wind and batteries in far-flung areas and completely abandon the centralized grid that runs on baseload sources like nuclear in certain parts of the world, or coal in certain parts of the world, or natural gas in certain parts of the world. So it is somewhat interesting to hear this debate because the debate is being sort of vocalized at a global perspective where people say high energy countries need to transition into cleaner fuel because they've already developed and they need to stop polluting the environment because Africa is bearing the brunt for it. But it would also be counterintuitive if we're thinking about the idea of 3 billion Africans who need opportunities to say that Nigeria, that has liquid natural gas reserves, or Tanzania, our neighbor, or even Egypt, should completely abandon their projects for liquid natural gas that might be used for cooling and heating and immediately start importing solar panels because we don't make them here and electrify a 55 million people country like Tanzania with solar only. So I think there has to be an honesty around understanding the complexity of the problem. We oversimplify the discussion by having an either-or dimension, as opposed to thinking of phasing sort of the approach to getting an optimized solution for our people as Africans. I do think there's a space for these things to coexist. The how those things will coexist is what we are trying to do today, which is why there's endless panels talking about energy in Africa and what we should do about it, because we don't simply have the problem of environmental concern alone. We have a problem of access, we have a problem of affordability, we have a problem of scale, and we have a problem of inequity. None of those can entirely be solved by saying we'll just go with option A alone. So I think we have to broaden the discussion a little bit and understand the complexity of the situation.
Thank you, Martha. And I think energy mix then is a topic that should be popped up at that point. But I want to come to you, Halima. And I want to come to you because we know the Decolonize campaign had a series of legal cases together with partners to, push back on the development of the Lamu coal power project that was happening back some years back. I think it was 2019. From a legal aspect, what have you to say about this narrative that we need coal to be able to develop to the potential that we need, or we need oil to be able to reach that threshold of development as Africa?
So just speaking from what Martha said, it's a transition. You know, that is why we not only have the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, we have the Energy Act, we have the Petroleum Act. In the Energy Act, we deal with downstream coal. In the Petroleum Act, we still have coal. So it's not, we can't transition immediately. We understand that. Our main priority right now, as per Vision 2030, is to develop as fast as possible, but sustainably. And that means having in our energy mix, not just renewable energy resources, but IPP producers who give us thermal power, because we need that. So it's true, yes, we need to have our focus on renewable energy, but it's not feasible to get there immediately. And we also need to ensure that we look at our national circumstances. And if we have petroleum and we need those monies to develop, if we have other finite resources such as coal, yes, of course, decolonize was a big movement, but if you look at the case, the legal case, it was not anti-coal. It was not completely anti-coal. It was about due process. Yes, you want to have a coal plant in an ecologically sensitive area, you need to put mitigation measures that take care of the harms that we already know come out of coal. So I am a true believer in sustainable development. I'm not anti-finite resources. I think they're important. That is why the developed world got to where it is right now, but we've learned we can leapfrog them. We can have our finite resources, coal, petroleum, but we know there's a cost to it because we've seen that cost now and it affects us. So let's transition, but let's transition responsibly, and that's what the law gives us a chance to do.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us that aspect, Halima. I think what struck me while you were speaking is the fact that as Africa, we're in a sweet spot that's not so sweet. And I say this because we have the lowest level of emission across the world, but we're also heavily affected by the effects of climate change. But as we are talking about this, there's an opportunity, I hear it said in different platforms, to leapfrog into a more sustainable future and really skip the fossils, skip the dirty fuels, and just move straight into the uptake of renewable energy because we have the potential. But as that conversation is going on, there is, we have an energy mix that we also need to develop, and we also need to transition slowly but surely instead of leapfrog. So very interesting theme that's coming out of the debate that's coming out here. And I'm sure there's so many comments and questions coming in through the chat box. But I want to turn to you, Magiro, because you said something interesting before, and you said non-green solutions are not the way forward. So I want to bring this question back to you. Do you think that Kenya, Africa, we can develop purely on green energy?
On my opinion, I can say first we can, but we needed to focus in a certain way. Because I think Kenya and also in Africa, if you go to the law that is the petroleum and the energy, you realize that if you need the permit maybe to construct maybe a certain or to put a generator, it will not take a time. You'll be given the permit within a period. But if you need to construct that maybe the hydropower, you shall take years and years. So I think what we normally need to focus and to change and to get the green energy, it is mainly we focus in one direction. Because today, we normally say you cannot stop meaning what you are doing and then focus and mainly on the green energy, maybe we say that the petroleum and also the other kind of the generation that mainly we stop at that time, but we need on the time going, which are we looking mainly in the green energy? Are we focusing on the green energy? Because we cannot focus in one direction on that. Today we need to generate 1 megawatt of hydropower. And the government, it is adding a lot of billions of money to go to the geothermal and the other kind of the production of the energy. We are using a lot of money, a lot of finance in also focusing what is not the green energy. And mainly we need to go with one direction. If we are focusing on the green energy, even if we are not mainly doing that a day, we need also to be, we are reducing mainly for the petroleum and also the kind of the production that is not green energy, but the green energy, we are mainly focusing maybe on the solar, on the other hand of the hydropower. Today we be saying that we need to do 500 megawatts of the hydro, 500 megawatts of the solar. And the other for the generator of the, also for the petroleum, we can say we need to do 1 megawatt hydro power.
Thank you, Magiro, and I think it's an interesting debate because everybody has a different perspective. And Ude, I'm going to come to you on the same question, but before we come to you, I understand we have a very important question from Zoom. So Wanja, I'm going to turn to you to deliver this question to us.
Okay, thank you, Passy. We have a lot of comments and reaction to the discussion that's going on right now. I've got Anita, and she first of all has a comment. She says, the people with the power and resources to change things are the barrier. And the biggest problem we have in South Africa is that the politicians who make the decisions have vested interest in fossil fuels. So this is the only logical reason why we are not transitioning really fast to a sustainable energy future. It feels like they are addicted to coal, oil, and gas, and they don't care about the consequences such as drought, floods, and air pollution. And so she says the big question then is, how do we shift this through storytelling? But she also has another question to Martha, and she asks, do you see the possibility of African countries sharing capability, resources, skills to produce renewables and create lots of jobs in the process? Yes, it's complex, but we need to put plans in place that give us energy sovereignty while we transition. I have another question here, Passy, to John. How easy or difficult was the process of registering your innovation and business as a local investor or innovator? Then I also have another question here, Passy, to Martha and Chiagozie, and it's, do you think green energy alone will be enough to develop Africa realistically? And also I have another question here for Halima. What effects could the mega infrastructure developments in the country, for example, the Lamu port, have on the ocean ecosystem and livelihoods of the local people? And Passy, I hope there are not too many. You can always ask me to repeat any of them, but I'll tell you the last one from Prince, who asks, how can we achieve clean energy use while the government is increasing taxes on green energy sources such as cooking gas? So I'll leave you with that for now.
Thank you, Wanja, for bringing in the comments and the questions coming from the audience that are listening to us today. And I think the panelists are well able to answer these questions, and I hope you are also capturing them. I'm happy to tell them back to you and to introduce Wanja back to tell them back to us. But those questions seem to have one similar theme attached to it, and it is the barriers to the uptake of green, sustainable, or renewable energy. And I want to start with you, Chair Gozie, because there was a question for you. and just to ask you to answer these questions that are coming in, but also touch what are the barriers to the uptake of renewable energy in Africa? Chair Gazier.
Yes, thank you, Passy. And yeah, I'm really enjoying the panel discussion. It's music to my ears what I hear. Quite a lot of very knowledgeable people, and it's really a pleasure to hear all of this. And I have taken note of the questions that we asked. I'll just start with the one that asked about if we can achieve industrialization and development with green energy alone. Of course, it's a gradual process. As was mentioned earlier in the panel, we cannot stop, all the fossil fuel channels or energy components today or tomorrow, but there needs to be a plan that should be followed. There needs to be a cut-off date. There needs to be a time where we're looking at that we can be fully on board this. And mind you, why it's important is because whether you like to move or not, the world is leaving you behind. You must surely transition. The earlier you do it, the better. If you have the resources to transition, why not do it earlier? If you do not have the resources, of course, you can, stagger your plans according to your national context. It's really important to understand this. It's not about people trying to beg you to transition or you're doing someone a favor to transition. You must transition because the market is moving. The economics are moving to green energy. So it compels you to transition. It's just about you planning your country the way according to your resources and according to the support you're getting on how you will transition. And it's very important to understand that the earlier African countries are able to take control of this market that green energy provides in terms of production of renewable energy components like solar materials, like the components for mini grids and the rest of them. The earlier we are, even in terms of transportation, even the electric cars to make solar cars, for example. The bit of intricacies I'll just take some time to explain. If you're driving a Tesla in Kenya, or in Nigeria, that's fine, that's perfect. It reduces emission, zero emission, fine. But what about making use of the sun that you have in abundance in Kenya to make solar cars? Because I'm sure that if Europe have enough sun here, they'll be making solar cars. They will not make cars that you will need to go and maybe plug in. They will make cars that as you drive, you're charging your car. So why not do that? Must we always copy things that others do? Why can't we develop things with our own national context? If we make use of solar energy that we have in abundance to make cars, we're growing a market for ourselves. We're building our economy. We're creating jobs for people. That is how you create green jobs. You can't create green jobs by waiting for someone, to develop a market in the Netherlands or in California, and then you start importing cars. You cannot create jobs that way. So we must think intrinsically to be able to make these things happen. There was a question about politicians having vested interest in fossil fuels. Of course, that is true. In a large extent, that is true. But also, there's also something that is true is that they cannot immediately stop, our fossil fuels. In fact, as African countries, we have a carbon limit. We have a carbon cap that we can still, get to before we can commence full decarbonization, because we understand our peculiarities. Nigeria, for example, about 90%, I would think, of our budget is funded by sale of oil. For the past 3 years, we've been borrowing money left, right, and center. So imagine if we even dropped this off, people would go hungry. And this is also something I would like to take this opportunity to point out for activists, because sometimes I watch TV or I see things on Twitter, and I see some African activists who are, making some activism that are not really organic from the continent. Things that work in other places does not necessarily work in Africa. You have to understand your national context. If someone in, let's say, Denmark, for example, is calling the government to action to decarbonize fully today or tomorrow, they can do that. They have the resources, and everything is in place. They can do that. But if you in your country that is 90% dependent on fossil fuel to fund your budget, you're calling on your country to stop everything in 1 week, in 2 weeks, in 1 year, it's not possible. And it even makes you come off as lacking in knowledge, for not understanding your national context. So you can push your government to have a plan that they can follow. And you have to be realistic about that to know what works and what works. If you become the president tomorrow, what kind of action will you take that will be realistic, that will not make people poor? Because you're not going to decarbonize for people to start suffering and become poor or lose their jobs. You have to plan all these things in context. Because these people that are going to transition from fossil fuel, they're also human beings, and they work to build the country's economy. So you have to also make sure that they transition in a very just and sustainable manner. Of course, in terms of job creation, there's a lot of avenues to create jobs, huge potentials, but we need to have people who think, who can manage this process, and who can drive it. There was a question about tax and tariffs. I think that is a huge obstacle for the uptake of renewable energy in the continent. When the government is slapping taxes and tariffs on solar renewable energy components that we are not even producing in our countries, it just negates the whole essence of promoting renewable energy. And mind you, this is an area where young people are engaging. There's a lot of youth startups on solar energy and renewable energy across the continent. So if you're imposing tax and tariffs extravagantly, and then you're just hurting youth-led businesses, youth-led startups, and you're hurting the uptake of these companies. You're making them more expensive than they can be. Okay, the other alternative is, if you're imposing these tariffs, are you producing it locally? If the answer is no, then it's a no-brainer. It's a wrong policy decision. So we have to be careful of irresponsible policies at our national governments and at our national level that are, scuttling the uptake of renewable energy and sustainable energy components. Clean cooking, for example, it affects women's health a lot because in most African countries, there's this patriarchal ecosystem where women are a lot more the people that make the meal in the house, which is not supposed to be, but that's what it is. And it affects their health a lot when they're using dirty fuel, and also the health of the kids. So we have to, when you're taxing these things, you're doubling, you're doubling their difficulty, you're doubling their vulnerability and everything else that affects them. And this has to be contextualized. I think you have to hold people in your parliament and your government accountable and make sure that the people that are going to represent you are really people who can articulate these policies.
Thank you, Uday. And I think one of the things that I highlighted from your identification of some of the barriers to the uptake of renewable energy is our capacity to move beyond copying what other continents are doing and really innovating for ourselves, which is important. I like the idea of having solar cars as well, as opposed to electric cars. But I want to come to you, Martha, now to just answer some of the questions that were coming from the virtual platform. But also, as you're answering those questions, just to highlight from your perspective and area of expertise, some of the barriers to the uptake of green energy. Just try again.
Is my mic on? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Anita's question. Thank you, Anita, for the question. I believe that was your name from South Africa, asking if African countries can share capacity across the different countries and how that could create jobs. So the short answer is yes, and it's the issue then becomes, how do the countries within the continent align their self-interests as a country with the regional interest as a continent? It's not an impossible thing to do, but there is some difficulty attached to it because each individual country has its own development priorities and development objectives. However, if we think about some of the positive indications that we are seeing at the moment, like the formation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the formation of regional power pools, like the West African Power Pool, the East African Power Pool, there's one in South Africa as well. And we think of those as indications for what is possible and what the future could look like, then there is high potential for African countries to not only share their natural resources in the sense that if Kenya or Ethiopia has a lot of geothermal, they can generate that and transmit it to other African countries, but we can also share our human resource, which is share the skill and the ideas around certain things in specific African countries that are more advanced than others, and in that way democratize, I guess, energy access and energy knowledge. So I think it's a possibility, and I think it's a good way for young people to think about in that framework, what opportunities exist for us then? What do we need to know? What do we need to learn about so that we have a marketable skill set, so to speak, that can be transferred across the African countries that exist today? The second question is one that we had answered a little earlier. It was about, is green energy alone enough for African countries to reach their, I guess, energy goals? And to refer to something I said a little earlier, at the moment, no. Over time, yes. So that's the reality of it. Right now, this moment, we don't have enough. We have enough natural resources, but not enough of the infrastructure to actually tap into that, and therefore electrify the entire continent. But over time, that is the ideal, and that is the direction that Halima was talking about, which is we should definitely prioritize the idea of electrifying our countries in the greenest possible way. And for that to happen, so one of the barriers, because Passy asked me to mention a few of the barriers that I see from where I sit, one of the barriers to that is adapting the systems we already have today, which are called centralized grid systems. So for many African countries, we have a grid network that is often either owned or operated by the government, and it is mostly existing in cities and towns and along infrastructure like railways and roads. But you find in most rural areas that's not available, so those areas are usually off-grid. Now, once we start generating power using solar or wind or solutions like Magiro Hydro, what you realize is those solutions are called off-grid because they're islanded, they're removed from the centralized system. But then, how then do we ensure the same standards across people who are supplied in rural areas and those who are supplied in cities? So we have to develop the standards for people who are operating in off-grid areas to at least meet certain basic minimums that are required for electricity to be transmitted safely. Besides the standards, the other thing is the wind blows only a certain time of the day and the sun only shines during the daytime. You don't have sunshine at night. So what do we do in instances where we actually need lighting at night? So one of the ways to adapt our systems is to think of, okay, so perhaps we shall need some sunshine and some batteries or some kind of storage so that we can then adapt these green systems that we are talking about to actually serve us 24/7. And then the last question was about tax. How can the government say they're incentivizing green energy if they're taxing all the things that would allow us to actually transition into green energy? And the truth is, I, as a taxpayer, also don't know. But as an energy practitioner, I would like to think of it in this way. I always work under the presumption that the government is working as a representative and for the good of the citizens of a country. And so if I think about the situation that way, I would assume the government is not taxing bread and oil because they want us to die of hunger. And neither are they taxing, renewable energy equipment because they don't want us to transition to them. As I mentioned earlier, we have a combination of factors, and one of those is how do we raise finance internally? How do we raise domestic finance to achieve all these objectives that we've set out? And unfortunately, one of the ways to do that is to actually raise tax revenues for our country. So we have this Sophie's choice, this really difficult choice of deciding, should our government get external debt that we have to pay for years and years, or should our government try and raise revenues internally to allow us to meet these same objectives? I don't have a solution for it, but it's just something for us to think about.
Thank you, Martha, and I think you've raised a very good perspective and question for the policymakers and regulators listening to the conversation this afternoon. I want to come to you, Halima and Magiro, but with a different question, as you also try to tackle the questions that were asked to you. And it is, these are very critical conversations that we're having, and they have an impact at various levels. But majority of the time, we have these conversations either in the offices, in the boardrooms, at the UN meetings for you, Chiagozie. And how do we begin to move these critical conversations from the offices, from the ballrooms, from those virtual platforms, and bring them back to the community? I'll start with you, Halima, and you're also a member of the Energy Reference Group at SID. How can we move those conversations from the offices to the community. And this is critical because for those of you who are listening to the community roundtable, this is something that came up, and I really want us to tackle it on this panel. How do you think we can do that, Halima?
That's a very good question. I'll start with the question that was raised for me, which is, I believe the effects of the Lamu port, ocean, and the livelihoods of Lamu people. Now, I'm not a scientist. I cannot really speak to the impacts of that Lamu port. What I will say, however, is that the Lamu port is a very crucial development project for Lamu County that has been historically marginalized. So even the public interest litigation case against that Lamu port was not against the port. It was the process that had been followed in giving licenses to construct this port. It's ensuring that the fishermen and other livelihoods that are reliant on those areas adjacent to the port have been compensated. It's ensuring that there was a strategic environmental assessment that had been done even before the entire port, and of course its overall project, the LAPSET project, had been commenced. So it was about due process. It's not, of course, we expect this is a man-made feature. We're not going to have one port, we're going to have 23 berths. That will be very impactful, but we also have to balance the economic gains that Lamu will get from having these ports. So we always have to balance. There will always be a cost, but balance it with what the gains that we'll be getting from whichever development project that we have. Okay, coming to your question, to move these conversations forward, you need to capacity build people to understand that they have a stake, they have a right to get accessible, affordable energy, to have a government that responds to them. So legal empowerment, which is what I work a lot in, I believe that's a huge factor in ensuring that the local people understand their role in it. Another way is one of this the forum that we're currently having, which is bringing different people working in different spaces and trying to ensure that we speak with one voice, we each understand each other, we take away the jargon, in terms of what our roles could be, so that we could have one voice that speaks to government, that elects government, that ensures that whichever laws and policies have been put are implemented for our benefit.
Thank you, Halima. I'll come to you, John. You have worked very closely and very actively at the community level. So I want to believe that you have already had these kind of conversations with your community in Murang'a, but what would be your advice to those who are still having these kind of conversations on the energy transition, what needs to be done to secure a sustainable energy future? What is your advice for them to move these conversations from the offices, from the ballrooms, to the grassroots level as well?
I think the time that we normally apply all the permits, there is that public participation mainly. That allow the owner of the hydro that maybe you want to build to be able to construct. I also say that mainly in the community area, we normally get a lot of the support that mainly it is needed there, because the community, they normally know that you are coming to solve the problem that they normally have. But if you focus on the government issue, on also the receiving of the permits, that is where you see it reach a time you see all the documents that you require, meaning from the government, from the Ministry of Energy, from the Ministry of Environment. It delay, maybe you can have a plan, this site it needs to be built maybe 3 or 5 years. But you shall see that you are getting the permit allowed maybe 4 to 5 years, the time that you are not be able to to build the power. So I think on the community is the community they normally support the project that is coming up to their village. But if you focus on the government way, that is where everything it is get delayed.
Yeah. Thank you, John, for sharing that with us. I think there was a question for you from the Zoom, and it was, what are some of the challenges that you experienced as a young person setting up an off-grid electricity solution for your community? Just briefly tell us if there are any barriers to that green development project that you were putting up during the time.
I think the time that I was starting to come up with the hydro project, a lot of people, they realized that their vehicles, it is like a competitor of the KPLC. But what I was mainly trying to do, it is the community that they are within to get reliable and affordable power. It is not mainly for trying to come up exhibiting with the Kenya Power, but the challenge is Kenyans, they normally know it is only the Kenya Power that they normally supply electricity. But what mainly I am doing, I am generating and then supplying the Kenya Power. And you normally know the Kenyan is only have the permit to generate, and then from that time to sell it direct to the Kenya Power, and the Kenya Power to distribute to the community. Because on my side, I focus the time that I can say the power I need to generate. It is not enough to sell it to the Kenya Power. And the main thing, it is not mainly generating and then selling to the Kenya Power, because I will not solve the problem that our community are solving. That is the time that I decide to generate and then to give it direct to the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, John, and very important issues you're raising again, which ushers me to the final question before we kind of move on to the next step of this session. And it is then, it is the future of energy in Africa off-grid? Now I'll start with you, Chair Gozie. Just briefly, in about 1 minute, is the future of energy in Africa off-grid?
Well, it looks like it. Of course, there will be some convergence at some point, maybe mid-century or something in that line. But it's moving towards that. People need to have a lot of independence in the energy generation. I'm a huge champion of energy democracy, that people should be able to provide the energy for themselves, use it as they want, be able to control it, be able to sell it to the government or to their neighbors if they want, to be absolutely in control of the energy choices. And this is how you can help achieve, energy access. This is a continent that has 600 million people without access to electricity, and you need to solve this problem. It's a huge problem. The government has proven itself incompetent in solving this, and you need to give the power to the people to solve this problem. If this happens in such a large scale, we are moving to a lot of off-grid. I may not be able to say that it will be completely, off-grid. There will also be some community things that are happening there, but largely independent from a national scale, a national grid that government may be providing. So this is the way it's going. In a lot of countries that have implemented this, for example, in Bangladesh, it's really developing quite well and rapidly. People are absolutely in control in some communities, especially in rural areas where there's no electricity in 50 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. There are communities like this in the continent. There are people who haven't seen electricity. It's ridiculous, but they are out there. So we need to solve this problem by giving power to the people to decide on their energy needs. And if this happens, yes, we're looking at output.
Thank you, Chair Gozie. Martha, 1 minute. Is the future of energy in Africa decentralized, off-grid?
Since I have a minute, I'll try to make this really quick. The future of energy in Africa is hybrid. So it is off-grid and on-grid. At the moment, our best bet for electrifying rural areas is really through the use of off-grid and mini-grid systems, decentralized systems that are close to where the users are, using the resources available there, and having distribution networks attached to those generation systems. However, we still have quite a bit of use for our centralized infrastructure, such as the uses that Anita was talking about. How do we interconnect African countries if we decentralize our entire system? And so, in my view, the future of energy in Africa is a hybridized system where we do have centralized networks and we do have off-grid systems.
Great, thank you, Bertha. Halima.
I align myself with what Martha has said. It is a hybrid, and the reason is because, like, even in Kenya, I think in 2018 we had gotten up to 90% connectivity, and it was because of having a centralized grid as well as off-grid solutions. So those are the solutions that work for us. However, just thinking back to the cost of our electricity, which is still very high, we need transmission and distribution networks that run across countries to ensure that at the very least, yes, we'll have access to energy. Energy sovereignty is very important. But if we can share, we have the Continental Free Trade Agreement. If we can share resources, sell to each other at a much affordable rate than it is to have off-grid or centralized grid solutions that are expensive, we need to do that.
And John, I'm sure you're going to align to this as well, but I give you 1 minute to just expound for us. Is the future of energy in Africa off-grid?
On my side, mainly, I can say that the off-grid and the on-grid, it is not mainly coming for exhibiting each other. What you are normally looking, it is to solve the problem that is there. So if you look on the on-grid, what we are normally doing, you are generating power at a certain, maybe 400 kilometers, and then we need to do transmission to a certain area where we normally have water that can be, you can set aside there, maybe a certain production that will be able to solve that community area. But you are using a lot of money for the construction. And the construction from a certain area that may be 400 kilometers, on the construction of the on-grid, it is a lot of cost. And the power that, I think also what we need to look is that the consumption of the power that you are giving at a certain, is it in the market? We need to do research that as this market or a certain town, we need this kind of the consumption, maybe 1 megawatt. There is no, instead of getting 20 megawatts for a certain town, and the need of that certain town, it is only 500 kilowatts. So mainly we need to focus which amount of the power that you need to generate, and which amount of the money that you can mainly focus. Because you find where the somewhat it is, where you are doing for the hydro, at that certain community, they normally need a certain amount of money. But if you need to be connected, the national grid, we need a lot of millions of money to be connected. There is maybe 10 or 30 customers that they want to be connected.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for that. Now, time has moved, and Wanja, I know you are there, and you know how heated and exciting the conversation is on this fireside right now. So I want to come back to you just for the 10 minutes or so we have left, just to check whether we have any conversations and comments happening from our virtual audience. Wanja.
Thank you, Passy. As you said, because of time, I'm going to read to you 2 quick questions. Ibrahim Abdallah. Hello, Halima. Our government is investing a lot in renewable energy, but this is not directly impacting on the lives of the local communities. For example, the Lake Turkana Wind Power Project has no benefit for the Marsabit County, leave alone the local community. So Marsabit County residents still depend on generators to to do their work while the wind power project is connected to the national grid. How can we ensure that such projects benefit the local communities? And then we also have Bijou from YouTube. He's asking, is nuclear energy green energy, and is there potential for it in Kenya?
Thank you, Wanja, for those questions. I'll quickly jump to you, Halima, to address the question coming from Ibrahim.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. The Turkana wind power plant injected quite a bit of energy, I believe 310 megawatts, into the national grid, and that's what pushed us up all the way to 90%. When you look at the Energy Act, local communities and the county government has a stake in royalties that come out of extraction and use of renewable resources. So 5% to local communities and 25% to county governments. So there's a benefit there. With regard to that county in particular, it falls under the last mile project because of the vastness of the county, how difficult it is to connect the entire county into the national grid. It will take time. So at the moment, off-grid solutions are what works for you, and it's for the county government and the local community to agitate, request the county government and indeed the national government to ensure that, yes, the county has taken the brunt of this project for the benefit of the entire country. Then they also need to be prioritized in ensuring that the rest of the county gets access to energy, be it that project or other off-grid solutions from other areas, solar or other wind projects.
Thank you, Halima. There was the second question, and I want to bring this to you, Chiagozie. Nuclear energy, is there potential? Should we focus on it? Should we invest in it as Africans?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. It always divides opinion, even in a globalist engagement. For nuclear energy, it's of course it has its gains on its sides, but it also has a lot of side effects on the other side. It's something being considered, a lot of research being done in different spheres. Of course, there are people who are pushing this. You also have to understand there's also an interest market around it as well. Personally, I think we have to go renewable. First of all, we've not exhausted what we have with renewable energy. So going into such uncertainties that have potentials to be really explosive, it's something we may want to avoid for now. And when you're talking nuclear, also you have to consider the dangers associated, because a lot of countries will claim they want to develop the energy system using the nuclear power, and it may be difficult to monitor what is going on with that. We are potentially setting up ourselves for a very difficult, edgy time in such a scenario. Not discounting it, maybe in the future when we have a lot more clarity on some impact and some health issues that could emanate from that, then we can have a look. But there's an element of wastefulness that comes with that, and we can also avoid. Yeah. So for me, it's actively a conversation, a debate that continues, and I'm not sure the jury is out completely, but I will think that we stick to renewable energy that we have in Switzerland. Here, there are conversations, huge conversations about this. There are even treaties that the government has been, pushed around to sign or not. Yeah, but I would prefer not to make more comments on that. It's a bit delicate.
Great. Thank you, Chair Gazier, for that. And thank you for joining us. I know you'll be leaving shortly. But I want to tell you thank you in case you leave before we go. I want to bring us to our closing question for this panel. And it's going to be a little bit twofold, and I'll give each one of us just 1 minute to answer this twofold question. The question is, we've talked about so many green forms of energy. We've talked about the non-green forms of energy as well. Have not had a single one of you talking about biomass, especially in the aspect of clean cooking. We know that 80% of the East African population depends on biomass as a source of cooking. So in your closing remarks, as I ask each one of you to give us a little inspiration or a call to action, I also want you to just make a brief comment about the use of biomass and how that affects the environment. So I'll start with you, John, this time. 1 minute, biomass, and your call to action or inspiration to our listeners this afternoon.
On my head, no matter talk more about the biomass, no matter stick on the hydro. Yeah.
That's okay. So what would be your closing remark, your final word for our audience today in 1 minute?
The audience, what I can normally say is that we are looking for the green energy that affordable reliability. So if you get the affordable reliable power, I think whole of Kenya and also the Africa, we shall mainly look for the green energy.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Chair goes here because you have to leave. I give you 1 minute. If you have any remarks on biomass in all its forms, charcoal, firewood, waste, let us know. And also give us your final word or your call to action or inspiration for our listeners this afternoon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Passy. I see comments on the chat about Chernobyl, like really, really ugly incidents that remind us of the dangers of nuclear power. I just wanted to mention that regarding biomass, of course, they are opposite school of thoughts, about how some parts of it will cause air pollution and the other. But, you have to consider there are various types of biomass and there are various sources. So which ones are good enough that they are not contributing to what they should be mitigating? And that's in that way you'll be able to arrive, at a good criteria to determine which biomass is good enough to be used and which ones are not, that efficient, are not that green in terms of providing energy that has limited or reduced or zero emissions, that they are not even causing more emissions than the previous sources would do. So yes, it's definitely a solution, an alternative, but have to be considered in context of what leverage does it have on already existing sources.
Thank you, Chair Gozier, and thank you for joining us for this session. I want to come to you, Halima. Talk to us a little bit about biomass and give us your call to action or inspiration.
So the Energy Act talks about biomass as part of renewable energy. About the majority of the rural population uses biomass. It recognizes that, and it devolves that function to counties. So perhaps what we would do is recommend county governments to come up with these regulations. It's a shared function, electricity and gas reticulation, as well as energy regulation. Both national government and county governments can come up with regulations on the same. So please, just to encourage county governments to regulate a resource that is already there, that most of the rural population uses. The national level, just to encourage that we have the renewable energy feed-in tariff system. We don't have regulations yet. It also includes biomass. Come up with regulations to implement legislation. And in terms of call to action, what I would do is just encourage people, Kenyans, really. We have 2022 elections coming up. We haven't talked about politics, but politics is a huge influence in policy. Just a few weeks ago, the president removed, from the Finance Act 2021, removed VAT from renewable energy products, and boom, the entire spectrum of that sector has changed. So just now that we have MCAs, we have MPs, women reps, governors, as the president is to challenge your legislators, whoever is running for elections, to give you their proposals on how they can ensure that you have access to energy, and that whatever energy you have, whatever bills come to you, are affordable.
Thank you so much, Halima, and you've raised a very important point in your closing remarks, but I won't speak more to it. Martha, 1 minute, biomass, and your call to action.
Okay, as the electrification champion on this discussion today, my view on biomass is that it is what we have today, but we really should be phasing it out quickly. And one of the ways to do that, again, is tied to the idea that, you know, if we electrify every place cheaply, we can cook with electricity. I know that many variations of biomass, briquettes, we'll say charcoal, we'll say firewood, but for me, fundamentally, really, what we are trying to do is to avoid spending time going to look for charcoal, firewood, briquettes, misogoros, those things for maize corn, kernels. We should just think of ourselves and envision a world where the idea of us cooking with electricity is not this foreign concept. Because really, it's the cleanest way to cook, and it is the least time consuming. So I guess as a closing call to action, the vision I painted at the beginning, the Africa that I hope to live in 2080. And you know, it seems like a long time, but that's 60 years from now. 60 years ago, many of our countries were still colonies. So the one thing I know for sure is that Africans have a track record of adapting to change and changing their circumstances. We have receipts. That we know how to do. So what the next 60 years looks like for us is really, in many ways, in our hands. And so what I'd encourage anyone who's joined us virtually or even here in the room to think about is what part of this rather complex problem would you like to participate or contribute towards solving? And then just get up every morning and do a little bit to chip away at that problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. And because you've taken us 60 years, my closing remarks will bring or draw your attention to the Energy Futures for East Africa report that we have that actually visions what the energy sector in East Africa will look like by the year 2050. And really, the report shares stories about what could happen if we heavily invest on non-sustainable energy sources within the region. The second, and that story is called Mitumba. So Mitumba is used as a metaphor for second-hand energy sources that we are importing from other continents into our continent. The second story that will interest you in this report is the market story. And this is really a story about how the market plays the integral role of the energy transition with the decentralized solutions in the region. And the final story is a story that kind of reflects Magiro's story, and it's called The Struggle Story. And it is about an engineer who left the city and went to the rural areas where he came from and set up a sustainable energy solution for the community. At this point, I want to close and invite Wanja for the next segment of this panel. It has been a pleasure hosting you all today. Thank you.
So before we head over to Bill for the Art in Action section, we're going to run a quick poll. It's going to come on your screen, and all you need to do is just click yes or no. There it is. So you can go ahead and vote. And then we're going to announce the result real quick and see where we stand on these questions that have been raised on some of these issues. And here we go. On the first question, will renewable energy alone be enough for Africa to meet its developmental ambitions? The yes have it. Second question, do you think Africa is ready to stop using biomass, for example, charcoal, firewood, and all of that? The no's have it at 74%. Third question, do you think African governments have a plan on how the continent will transition to a green economy? The no's have it with a resounding 70%. And question 5, which country in Africa is most vulnerable to climate change? The yes have it with Madagascar. That brings us to the end of this poll. Thank you for participating. We're going to do the same tomorrow, and I'm going to hand it over to Billy for the Art in Action session.